Welcome, dear listeners, to a story of resilience, love, and the power of standing up for justice. Join us as we explore the journey of Camille and Samuel, a couple whose strength turned pain into purpose, transforming not only their lives, but also the lives of countless others. Let's begin. Camille Walker had imagined this moment so many times, her child's birth, surrounded by a team of kind, competent doctors and nurses who would guide her through the process with care and compassion. But nothing in her dreams prepared her for the reality she now faced. The air in Riverside General Hospital was heavy, cold, and clinical. Camille's contractions had begun hours ago, each wave of pain more excruciating than the last. Her heart pounded as she leaned against the hospital bed, clutching her stomach, trying to control her ragged breathing. She felt as though her body were caught in a battle with itself, each muscle straining to bring her baby into the world. But the sterile room around her offered no comfort, only the distant sound of shuffling feet in the corridor, muted announcements over the intercom, and the relentless hum of fluorescent lights above. Her mind raced as another contraction gripped her. She pressed the call button with trembling fingers, hoping anyone would come to her aid. But minutes stretched into an eternity, and no one arrived. Her breaths grew shallower, each exhale punctuated by muffled sobs. The stark white walls seemed to close in around her, amplifying her loneliness and fear. Finally, the door creaked open. Camille's heart leapt. Relief. At last, someone would help her. But the figure who entered, a young nurse with a pinched expression and impatient movements, did not even meet Camille's pleading eyes. The nurse busied herself with the equipment, scribbling notes and adjusting the floor, all without a word of acknowledgement. "Please," Camille whispered, her voice trembling with pain and desperation. "The baby, I think he's coming soon." The nurse sighed, her demeanor dismissive. "It's your first pregnancy," she muttered, barely audible. "These things take time." Camille felt the words hit her like a slap. Her pain was real, her fear palpable, yet she was being reduced to a nuisance, an afterthought. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to swallow her anger and stay calm. "Can you just check? Please?" The nurse finally glanced at her, but her gaze was icy and unkind. "You're fine. Call if something changes," she said before disappearing through the door, leaving Camille alone once more. Camille bit her lip, holding back the sobs that threatened to escape. She looked down at her trembling hands, their grip on the bedside rails tightening as another wave of pain surged through her. It was as if the entire hospital were conspiring to deny her humanity, to turn her into just another nameless patient. She thought of Samuel. Her husband was supposed to be here, but he had been caught up in urgent business out of town. He had promised he'd make it back in time. But as the hours dragged on, doubt crept into Camille's heart. She needed him, his steady presence, his unwavering support. Without him, she felt like a leaf tossed about in a storm. The sound of footsteps outside the room drew her attention. Her heart quickened. Another nurse, perhaps, or a doctor. But the footsteps grew fainter, fading into the distance. Camille sank back into the bed, her body trembling. She was utterly alone. The door opened again, this time revealing an older doctor in a crisp white coat. Camille's heart lifted slightly. Surely, he would help her. But his demeanor was no different. He barely glanced at her, his eyes focused on the clipboard in his hands. "How are we feeling?" he asked flatly, the question sounding more like a chore than genuine concern. Camille struggled to find her voice. I'm in a lot of pain," she said, her words barely audible. "It's normal," the doctor replied curtly, making a quick note on the chart before turning toward the door. "Labor takes time." "Wait," Camille called after him, her voice cracking. "The baby. What about the baby?" The doctor paused briefly, his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn around. "Someone will check on you later," he said before walking out. Camille felt her spirit crumble. The tears she had fought so hard to contain now spilled freely down her cheeks. Her fingers pressed against the call button again, though she knew it was futile. The only answer she received was the deafening silence of the room. She clung to the memory of Samuel, imagining his face, his voice telling her that everything would be okay. He would fight for her, as he always had. But in his absence, she felt adrift, struggling to hold on to even the faintest glimmer of hope. Time passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Camille's vision blurred as the contractions grew stronger, her body urging her to push even as her mind screamed for help. She thought of the countless women who must have suffered like this, unheard, dismissed simply because of the color of their skin. The thought fueled a flicker of anger within her, but it was quickly drowned out by the relentless waves of pain. Another nurse entered, this one young and visibly irritated. Camille gathered what strength she had left to plead once more. "Please, I think something's wrong." The nurse barely glanced at her. "People always think their labor is the worst," she muttered under her breath, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're not special." Camille recoiled at the words, as if they had left a physical wound. She wasn't asking for special treatment, only basic care, a modicum of compassion. Was that too much? As the nurse left, Camille let out a small, broken sob. She had never felt so insignificant, so dehumanized. Her hands clenched the sheets, her knuckles white, as another contraction tore through her body. The pain was relentless, but the silence of the room cut deeper. She was drowning, unsehen und unhört, just as she felt she could endure no more. The door creaked open again. Camille braced herself for more indifference. But the figure who stepped inside was different. He was tall, his face etched with concern. His eyes, usually so calm and reassuring, were filled with alarm. "Camille," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion as he rushed to her side. He knelt beside the bed, his hand finding hers. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." The floodgates opened. Camille sobbed, gripping his hand as though it were her lifeline. The pain in her body remained, but the anguish in her heart began to ease. Samuel's presence was like a balm, soothing the raw edges of her suffering. "What's going on?" Samuel demanded, his voice sharp as he looked around the room. "Why hasn't anyone helped you?" Camille shook her head, her voice a broken whisper. They don't care. They just leave me here." Samuel's jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened with fury. "Not anymore," he said, his tone steely. He stood, his grip on her hand unrelenting. "I'll get this sorted." As he turned toward the door, Camille's tears flowed anew, not from despair this time, but from a fragile hope. Samuel was here, and with him, the tides began to turn. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Samuel Walker as he strode with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the sterile tile floor. Each step was fueled by anger and urgency, his mind replaying the sight of Camille lying helpless, her face pale, her body racked with pain. How could the staff at Riverside General Hospital, the very hospital he co-owned, have treated her with such indifference? His jaw clenched as he thought of her whispered words. "They don't care." As Samuel approached the nurse's station, his commanding presence drew the attention of the staff. A nurse, middle-aged with a practiced, but now visibly nervous demeanor, turned to greet him. She faltered under his piercing gaze. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice betraying the unease she felt. "You can start by explaining why my wife has been left unattended in her labor for hours," Samuel said, his tone low and steady, but carrying an unmistakable edge, "and why no one thought it was necessary to provide her the care she deserves." The nurse's eyes widened in recognition. Samuel's name was well known within the hospital's walls, but she had failed to connect it with Camille. Her lips parted as if to offer a hasty excuse, but Samuel raised a hand to stop her. "Don't. Just get me the attending physician immediately," he demanded. The nurse scrambled, grabbing the phone and stammering into the receiver. Samuel didn't wait. His eyes swept the station, landing on a younger nurse standing by the wall, her gaze cast downward. She looked familiar, likely one of the staff Camille had mentioned. He walked toward her, his footsteps heavy with purpose. "You," he said firmly, drawing her attention. The nurse flinched, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. Yes, sir, she managed, her voice shaky. You've been assigned to my wife's care. Haven't you? He asked. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but Samuel cut her off. No excuses. You looked at a woman in labor, in pain, and chose to dismiss her. Why? The nurse stammered, her words faltering under his unrelenting gaze. I didn't realize she was, I didn't know who she was. It shouldn't matter who she is, Samuel snapped, his voice rising slightly. Every patient who comes through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity. Your job is to care for people, not decide who is worthy of your attention. The young nurse opened her mouth to respond, but the arrival of Dr. Abbott, the attending physician, drew both their attention. The older man approached with a clipboard clutched in one hand, his expression carefully neutral. Emer Walker. Dr. Abbott began, his tone measured. I've been informed of your concerns. Concerns? Samuel said, turning to face him fully. His imposing figure seemed to loom even taller. My wife has been ignored, dismissed, and left to suffer while in labor. That's not a concern. Dr. Abbott, that's negligence. Dr. Abbott straightened, his grip tightening on the clipboard. Labor takes time, he said, his voice betraying a hint of defensiveness. We've been monitoring her condition, and there hasn't been any immediate cause for intervention. Samuel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Monitoring her condition? By leaving her alone and brushing off her pleas for help? By telling her she's not special and letting her cry out in agony? The doctor hesitated, his confident facade beginning to crack. I admit, there may have been lapses in communication. But, no, Samuel interrupted sharply. There weren't lapses. There was a choice made to ignore her. A black woman, in her most vulnerable moment. And I won't stand for it. The tension in the air was palpable. The other nurses and staff frozen in place, their eyes darting between Samuel and Dr. Abbott. The doctor shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though searching for support. But nankame, effective immediately. Samuel continued, his voice steady and authoritative. You are relieved of your duties concerning my wife. I've called in a new team, one I can trust to do their jobs without bias. Dr. Abbott bristled, his pride clearly stung. With all due respect, Mr. Walker, you can't just... I can, Samuel said, his tone final. And I will. If you have any objections, feel free to take them up with the hospital board. Oh, wait, he leaned in slightly, his voice low but cutting. I am the board. The color drained from Dr. Abbott's face. He opened his mouth as if to argue but thought better of it, nodding stiffly before turning on his heel and walking away. Samuel's gaze followed him until he disappeared down the corridor. The young nurse who had remained silent throughout the exchange now looked visibly shaken. Samuel turned back to her, his expression softening slightly but retaining its seriousness. If you truly care about this profession, let this be a lesson, he said. Patients are not just names on a chart. They're human beings. Start treating them that way. The nurse nodded mutely, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Satisfied that immediate action was being taken, Samuel returned to Camille's room. His anger hadn't fully subsided, but his focus shifted back to her. She needed him now more than ever. As he entered the room, Camille's eyes fluttered open. Her face, though still pale and etched with pain, lit up with relief at the sight of him. They're sending in a new team, Samuel said gently, sitting beside her and taking her hand. I've spoken to the staff. Things will be different now. Camille's lips trembled, her emotions catching up with her. You did that for me? Samuel cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. Of course, I did. No one, least of all you, deserves to be treated the way they treated you. I won't let it happen again. Before she could respond, the door opened, and the new team entered. Dr. Williams, a calm and experienced obstetrician, approached the bed with a warm, reassuring smile. Mrs. Walker, I'm Dr. Williams, he said, his tone kind. I'll be taking care of you from now on. We're going to make sure you and your baby are safe. Camille nodded, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. For the first time since she had arrived at the hospital, she felt seen, cared for. Samuel remained by her side as the team worked efficiently, explaining each step of the process and ensuring her comfort. The weight that had pressed so heavily on Camille's heart began to lift. The pain of labor was still intense, but the knowledge that she was no longer alone, no longer neglected, gave her the strength to endure. Samuel's hand never left hers, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. As the hours passed, Camille felt a renewed sense of hope. The ordeal she had endured wasn't over. But with Samuel by her side and a new team of professionals treating her with respect and empathy, she began to believe that she would come through it. And when the time finally came to meet their child, she knew Samuel would be there, fighting for her every step of the way. The hours crept by in Riverside General Hospital, but the atmosphere in Camille's room had transformed entirely. Dr. Williams and his team worked tirelessly to ensure her safety, their professionalism and compassion a stark contrast to the neglect she had endured earlier. The steady hum of the machines, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the calm voices of the staff created an environment where Camille finally felt cared for. But the emotional scars of what had happened lingered. Samuel remained rooted by her side, his large hand enveloping hers. Though he maintained a composed exterior, a storm brewed within him. Every groan of pain from Camille, every strained breath, sent a surge of anger through him, not at her, but at the system that had failed her so profoundly. He had seen injustice before, but this was different. This wasn't just any woman. This was Camille, his rock, his love, the mother of his child. She deserved more than this. She deserved the world. Camille opened her eyes briefly between contractions, her gaze locking with Samuel's. Though her face was pale and drawn, her eyes carried a flicker of gratitude. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice faint but steady. Samuel leaned closer, his tone soft yet firm. "Of course, I stayed. You think I'd leave you to handle this alone?" She managed a weak smile despite the pain. "You've always been stubborn, and you've always been worth fighting for," he replied, his words imbued with a quiet intensity that made her heart ache in the best way. Another contraction tore through her, and Camille's body tensed as she let out a low cry. Samuel's hand tightened around hers, his other hand brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "Breathe, Camille," Dr. Williams instructed gently, his steady presence grounding her. "You're doing amazing. We're almost there." Camille focused on Samuel's voice and the calm encouragement from the doctor. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, but she pressed on, driven by the promise of finally holding her baby. The pain was overwhelming, but in the brief moments of reprieve, her thoughts drifted to Samuel. He had always been her champion, even when they first met. Back then, he was a man with big dreams and an even bigger heart, someone who refused to let obstacles stand in his way. Over the years, she had seen him fight for countless causes, but nothing compared to the fight he was waging now, for her and their child. The memory of their first date came rushing back to her, a warm glow amid the haze of labor. They had gone to a small diner, the kind with sticky tabletops and mismatched chairs. It wasn't the setting that mattered, though. It was the way Samuel had looked at her, as if she were the most important person in the world. That same look was in his eyes now, and it gave her strength. "Samuel," she murmured, her voice cracking from the effort. "I'm here," he said immediately, leaning closer. She drew in a shaky breath. Promise me you'll always fight like this. For her. For us." His throat tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tears that spilled from her eyes. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always fight for you. For both of you." The words settled in her heart, a soothing balm against the fear and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. She nodded weakly, her grip on his hand unwavering. Dr. Williams interrupted the moment with a calm, yet urgent tone. "Camille, it's time. The baby's ready to come. You've got this." Camille's heart raced as a wave of determination surged through her. The contractions came harder and faster now, her body working with an intensity she hadn't known was possible. Samuel's voice was a constant in the background, steady and soothing. "You're so strong. Camille, you can do this," he said, his words a lifeline in the chaos. The medical team worked with precision, offering encouragement and guidance. Camille's world narrowed to the task at hand. Every ounce of her energy focused on bringing her baby into the world. She pushed with everything she had, her body trembling from the effort. And then, suddenly, the room filled with the sound of a baby's cry. Camille collapsed against the bed, her chest heaving as relief and joy washed over her. Tears blurred her vision as she looked down at the tiny, wriggling form placed on her chest. The baby's cries were loud and strong, a testament to the life that had just begun. "She's here," Samuel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He brushed a kiss against Camille's forehead before turning his gaze to their daughter. "Our baby girl." Camille gazed down at her daughter, her fingers trembling as she traced the delicate features of the newborn's face. She was perfect, tiny fingers, a button nose, and a softness that melted every ounce of pain and anger Camille had carried. In that moment, nothing else mattered. "She's beautiful," Camille whispered, her voice breaking. "She's so beautiful." Samuel knelt beside her, his eyes locked on their daughter. He reached out, his large hand dwarfing the baby's tiny one as he gently stroked her cheek. "Just like her mom," he said softly, his eyes brimming with tears. The medical team worked quietly in the background, their movements efficient yet respectful of the family's moment. Dr. Williams offered a kind smile. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Walker. She's perfect." Camille nodded, her tears falling freely now. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "Thank you for everything." The doctor nodded and stepped back, giving them space to bask in their joy. Camille cradled her daughter close, the warmth of the tiny body against hers filling her with a profound sense of completeness. Samuel sat beside her, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "She's here." Camille rested her head against his shoulder, her exhaustion forgotten in the presence of their daughter. "We did," she agreed, "and she's worth everything." For a while, they sat in silence, their little family cocooned in a bubble of love and gratitude. The pain, the neglect, the anger, it all faded into the background. In their arms was the promise of a new beginning, a life filled with hope and possibility. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, Camille's thoughts returned to the events of the past day. She glanced up at Samuel, her expression serious. "We can't let this happen again," she said softly. "Not to anyone else." Samuel's jaw tightened, and he nodded. "We won't," he promised. "This isn't over. We'll make sure they're held accountable." Camille looked back at their daughter, her resolve hardening. This child deserved a world where she would be treated with dignity and respect, where her voice would never be silenced. Camille and Samuel would ensure that. As the room grew quiet once more, the weight of what they had endured lingered in the air. But amid the pain and struggle, they had found something unbreakable: their love, their determination, and the bond they now shared with their daughter. And that, they knew, would carry them through whatever came next. The hospital seemed quieter now, but Samuel's resolve was anything but. Camille and their daughter rested peacefully, shielded from the chaos that had earlier consumed them. Yet Samuel couldn't find peace. The hours of neglect Camille endured, the cruel indifference she was subjected to, all of it churned inside him like a storm that refused to abate. In the sterile halls of Riverside General, Samuel approached the administrative office. His every step carried purpose, his jaw set with determination. This was no longer just about his family. It was about every patient who might walk into this hospital and face the same dismissive cruelty. Behind a heavy wooden desk sat Dr. Marcus Franklin, the hospital administrator, a man known for his detached demeanor. Franklin barely looked up as Samuel entered. "Emir Walker," Franklin greeted, his tone professional yet indifferent. "How is your wife?" "She's resting," Samuel replied curtly, his voice cold. "Thanks to Dr. Williams and his team. But that's not why I'm here." Franklin raised an eyebrow, finally setting down the papers in front of him. "Oh, I want answers," Samuel demanded, his voice sharp. "And I want to know how this hospital could allow its staff to treat a patient with such blatant disregard." Franklin sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Emir Walker, labor can be a difficult process. Emotions run high, and sometimes patients feel." "Don't patronize me," Samuel interrupted, his tone cutting through Franklin's weak justification. "This isn't about emotions. It's about negligence. It's about racism. My wife was in active labor, crying out in pain, and your staff treated her like she didn't matter." Franklin shifted uncomfortably, but Samuel wasn't done. "I heard the comments," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "I saw the dismissive glances, and the staff didn't care who they were hurting because to them, she was just another black woman they could ignore." Franklin cleared his throat, his face pale. "Emir Walker, we take allegations like this very seriously. I'll ensure an internal review." "An internal review?" Samuel scoffed, leaning forward. "No, that's not enough. This isn't just a matter of policy. It's a matter of culture. And that culture needs to change." For the first time, Franklin faltered, the weight of Samuel's words pressing down on him. But Samuel wasn't finished. "I'm not just a concerned husband," he said, his voice steady but forceful. "I own this hospital, and I will not tolerate this kind of treatment in a place that's supposed to offer care and compassion." The administrator's eyes widened, realizing the gravity of the situation. Samuel's position wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Franklin straightened in his chair, his voice suddenly more earnest. "Of course, Mr. Walker," he said quickly. "We'll initiate mandatory training for the staff. Sensitivity training. Improve protocols, whatever you deem necessary." Samuel leaned back slightly, his gaze piercing. "Good. And I want every member of the staff who failed my wife to be held accountable. Dismissals, demotions, whatever it takes." Franklin nodded hastily, scribbling notes as Samuel spoke. "I'll ensure it's handled immediately." Samuel's expression softened, but only slightly. "This isn't just about fixing today's mistakes. It's about making sure they never happen again. Every patient deserves respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Understand?" "Yes, Emir Walker," Franklin replied. "I'll see to it." Satisfied, but still simmering with frustration, Samuel left the office. He had taken the first steps toward change, but he knew the battle was far from over. It wasn't enough to confront the problem. They needed to rebuild trust and create a culture of accountability. Back in Camille's room, the atmosphere was calm but introspective. Camille sat upright in her bed, cradling their baby girl. The soft light from the window framed her face, which, despite her exhaustion, radiated a quiet strength. Samuel paused in the doorway, his chest tightening as he watched her. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly as he entered. Camille looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Better," she said, her voice warm. "She's perfect." "Samuel." He smiled, sitting beside her. "She gets that from you." Camille chuckled lightly, but the laughter quickly gave way to a more serious expression. "Samuel," she began hesitantly. "What happens now?" Samuel reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Now, we fight. For you. For her. For every woman who comes through these doors." Camille nodded, the determination in his voice giving her strength. "I want to help," she said firmly. "What happened to me? What happens to so many others? It can't keep happening." Samuel's heart swelled with pride. "We'll do it together," he promised. "We'll make sure no one else has to go through what you did." Underscore, 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 underscore. Over the next few days, Samuel and Camille began laying the groundwork for change. Samuel called for immediate staff meetings, addressing every department in the hospital. He spoke with conviction, his words cutting through any lingering complacency. This isn't just about policies, he told them. It's about people. Every patient who walks through these doors is someone's family, someone's loved one. And if you can't treat them with the dignity they deserve, you have no place here. Meanwhile, Camille reached out to community organizations, sharing her story and gathering support. She connected with other women who had faced similar experiences, their voices coming together in a collective call for justice. The hospital became a focal point for discussions about racism in healthcare, with Camille at the center of the movement. Her story resonated far beyond the walls of Riverside General. Local media picked up the narrative, highlighting the systemic issues that had been exposed. As more stories came to light, Camille realized just how deep the problem ran and how much work lay ahead. Underscore, 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 underscore. One evening, as Camille sat with Samuel in their living room, she voiced the idea that had been forming in her mind. What if we created something bigger, she said, her eyes lighting up with purpose. A foundation, a place where women can go for support, for advocacy, somewhere they'll be heard. Samuel looked at her, his admiration evident. That's a powerful idea, he said, and it's exactly what we need. Together, they began sketching out plans for the Empowerment Through Equality Foundation. The organization would provide resources, legal support, and advocacy for women facing discrimination in healthcare. It would also work to educate medical professionals, ensuring that compassion and respect became the standard, not the exception. As the days turned into weeks, the foundation began to take shape. Camille and Samuel poured their energy into the project, determined to turn their pain into progress. They knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they also knew it was worth it. Their daughter became a symbol of hope, a reminder of why they were fighting. Every time Camille held her, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the present. It was about building a better future for her child and generations to come. And so, with love in their hearts and fire in their souls, Camille and Samuel pressed on. Together, they were unstoppable. The day dawned bright and crisp, the sunlight streaming through the windows of Samuel and Camille's home. The house was alive with activity, a testament to how far they had come since those dark hours in the hospital. Camille stood by the nursery window, rocking their baby girl in her arms. The rhythm of the rocking chair creaked softly, a soothing sound amidst the joyful chaos of the morning. Samuel entered quietly, watching his wife with a tender smile. She looked radiant, her face illuminated by the morning light. And in her arms, their daughter stirred, her tiny hands reaching for the warmth of her mother. Camille noticed him and smiled back, her expression soft and full of love. She's growing so fast. Camille murmured, brushing her finger along their daughter's cheek. Every day, she changes a little more. I just want to savor every moment. Samuel crossed the room and placed a gentle hand on Camille's shoulder. You're doing an incredible job, he said. She's lucky to have you. Camille's smile faltered slightly, her thoughts drifting back to the hospital and the ordeal they had faced. I just want to make sure she grows up in a world where she's valued, she said, her voice tinged with emotion, where she's never made to feel invisible. Samuel knelt beside her, his gaze steady and reassuring. We're working on that, he said firmly. One step at a time. Underscore, 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 underscore. The launch of the Empowerment Through Equality Foundation was a turning point, held in the Grand Hall of the newly renovated wing of Riverside General. The event drew community leaders, healthcare professionals, and advocates from across the city. The atmosphere was charged with hope and determination. a stark contrast to the shadows that had once loomed over the hospital. Camille stood at the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Samuel, who stood nearby with their daughter cradled in his arms, his supportive smile encouraging her to begin. Taking a deep breath, she addressed the crowd. "Good morning, and thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "When I walked through the doors of this hospital, I never imagined I would leave with a story like mine. I thought I would find care, compassion, and support. Instead, I faced neglect, cruelty, and indifference." The room fell silent, her words resonating deeply with everyone present. But out of that darkness came a light. Camille continued, "The love of my family, the support of my community, and the determination to ensure that no one else would ever endure what I did. Today, we take the first step toward building a future where healthcare is a place of healing and respect for everyone, regardless of their race, background, or circumstances." The audience erupted into applause, the sound a powerful affirmation of her words. Camille felt a surge of pride and relief as she stepped back, her eyes meeting Samuel's. He mouthed, "I'm so proud of you," and her heart swelled. Underscore, 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 underscore. The foundation's work began immediately. Camille and Samuel threw themselves into advocacy, meeting with policymakers, hosting workshops, and connecting with healthcare providers. They sought to create a ripple effect, using their experiences to inspire systemic change, not just in their hospital, but in healthcare institutions across the country. Camille found herself becoming a voice for women who had been silenced. She spoke at conferences, shared her story in interviews, and met with other mothers who had faced similar struggles. Every story she heard fueled her resolve, reminding her why this fight was so important. Samuel, too, took an active role, ensuring that the hospital he owned became a model for compassionate, equitable care. He implemented strict policies against discrimination, hired a diverse and empathetic staff, and introduced mentorship programs to foster a culture of accountability and understanding. Underscore, 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 underscore. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, the weight of their work momentarily lifted. Samuel turned to Camille with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "none of this would have happened without your strength. You didn't just endure what happened. You turned it into something meaningful." Camille tilted her head, her gaze warm. "I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when I felt like I had nothing left." Samuel reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We're a team," he said simply. Their daughter gurgled from her playmat nearby, drawing their attention. Camille laughed softly, leaning forward to scoop her up. "And she's our legacy," Camille said, holding the baby close. "Everything we do is for her." Underscore, 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 underscore. Months passed, and the changes they implemented began to take root. The hospital saw a dramatic shift in its culture. Patients noticed the difference. Staff who once seemed indifferent now approached their work with compassion and diligence. Word spread, and Riverside General became known as a place where everyone was treated with dignity. The foundation also grew, its reach extending beyond the city. Camille and Samuel established partnerships with national organizations, expanding their impact and amplifying their message. Their work inspired other hospitals to reevaluate their practices, sparking a movement for equity in healthcare. But amidst their success, they never lost sight of their personal journey. Every evening, they made time for family dinners, for quiet moments with their daughter, for the life they had built together. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where love and hope flourished. One afternoon, as the sun bathed their backyard in golden light, Samuel and Camille sat together on the porch, watching their daughter toddle across the grass. Her laughter filled the air, a sound so pure and joyful that it brought tears to Camille's eyes. "She's so happy," Camille said, her voice soft. "She has you to thank for that," Samuel replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You've given her the world." Camille leaned into him, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "We've given her the world," she corrected. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their work momentarily forgotten. But even in the peace of that moment, they both knew their journey wasn't over. "There's still so much to do," Camille said finally, her tone reflective. Samuel nodded. "But we'll do it together," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "One step at a time." As the day gave way to evening, Camille and Samuel watched their daughter chase fireflies in the fading light. The glow of the insects mirrored the light in their hearts, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could always be found. Their story was one of pain and perseverance, of love and resilience. It was a story of two people who refused to let injustice prevail and who worked tirelessly to create a better world, not just for themselves but for everyone. And as they held each other, their daughter's laughter echoing around them, they knew they had only just begun. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of courage, love, and transformation. Camille and Samuel's story reminds us of the importance of standing against injustice and the power of unity in overcoming adversity. We hope their resilience inspires you to believe in change and fight for what's right. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more impactful stories. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And thank you for being part of our community. Until next time.